Hi, Danielle. Great to see you again.
It's good to see you too, Mel. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. A calmer, steadier, uh, easier to manage week. So that's always a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, we did just finish off a full moon. And
Right.
so that cycle is complete. And we're opening our ways up into or opening ourselves up to whatever the newest cycle happens to be.
And I think that's what we're going to explore tonight, isn't it? Is for this
Absolutely.
episode is looking at cycles.
Yeah.
So over to you. What do you mean when you are referring to cycles? Because there's lots of different ways of looking at that as an idea.
Right. So for me, when I'm talking about cycles specifically, is the cycle of change, how we get from being unaware of our behavior to the awareness of behavior and the things that we do in order to make the necessary improvements or change that's needed to break that pattern so that when this cycle returns for you, you can get to a deeper level of this pattern breaking that you've been working on.
Yeah, so there's lots of probably theories out there when we think about the cycle of change, and I certainly know that we, in the work that we do, we're often thinking about, if somebody comes to you for some support and they want to talk through their issues, it might look as though they're ready to start making some steps and make some change, but sometimes they're only really ready to talk. And so this is an idea that people aren't necessarily ready to make the steps or the changes necessary
Right,
to
which
come
is
out of the
step
cycle or the pattern
one.
that they're in.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and that's step one of the cycle. You're ready to talk about it, and even though you're kind of unaware or consciously aware, not
Yeah.
not consciously aware that of your role in this cycle or in this pattern that you're in, being ready to talk about it is the first step.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because often people can experience difficulties with work colleagues, or there's been some changes and they feel a sense of disharmony, or something doesn't feel right, but they're not necessarily aware of what that's about. And what you're referring to in that cycle of change is the first stage is someone is often unconscious of that process and are just feeling unease, or the relationships aren't working out, things aren't going so well at work, but they haven't sat back and really reflected on what might be going on in that. And even if they have, like what you said, the first step to go and seek some support, talk to a friend, go and see a therapist, go and see a life coach, is by then saying, right, okay, I'm starting to become aware that I've been here before. This is a familiar pattern. I've been with this situation before, and I need to make some changes. But it's not easier. It's not easy to do for a lot of people. Sometimes they can keep going through that cycle.
Right. We'll just go ahead and get that part out of the way. You don't change until you're ready to change.
Yeah.
And that's that. And sometimes that takes years. Sometimes it takes months. Sometimes it takes weeks. Sometimes it takes hours. Depends on how fed up with it you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
cycle of change might begin with the conversation, but
Yeah.
that cycle of change, that cycle, keyword cycle, will continue until you're ready to take that next step beyond the conversation. It's a really good place to find your victimhood is inside of that first step. Like, these people did me this way, or this is happening, or I'm not able to make the changes because so and so is involved in my life still.
Yeah. Or I
Right.
need to keep this job, I have to do these hours, or yeah. And often that's the point you made about, whether they're ready to make the change or not. And I think I've mentioned in other conversations we've had that often, I'd say in 98% of cases, for the referrals that we dealt with as a service, people were driven to go to the doctor to say, I'm noticing this in my child, or I'm having this difficulty. But it was usually preceded by some kind of crisis. It's usually where something or several things have just fallen. You know, we talked about
Those
the
tower
tower.
moments.
Yeah, those tower
Yeah.
moments where it's
Yeah.
all just looks like it's gone pear-shaped.
Yeah.
And that's then driven them to seek help because it's now too much to bear. Because one thing that's difficult for humans generally is to tolerate unease or difficulties, and that can be why some people take drugs and drink and do something else, because it can feel utterly intolerable, or they don't know where to go
Or to even
to
begin.
sort this out and
Yeah.
where to begin.
Right.
Or that actually that's what that's about, that it's the, whether you call it the soul, your own spirit, your system, the point that you've got to move through. And often people stay in situations that are really bad for them, or intensely bad for them, or just bad for them, or just, you know, a little bit
It's not
toxic, a lot of
healthy.
toxic.
Yeah.
Just
It
not
depends on the
healthy. Yeah.
level. Sometimes it's just not
Yeah.
healthy for you to stay in a situation or have the same habit or any of that, you know.
Yeah.
The word toxic is easy to throw in, because really anything in your world could be considered toxic if it's not in, you know, in alignment with what's best or what the highest timeline is or highest alignment is for you.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, even my relationship with my animals can become toxic in nature, you know, if I'm just allowing myself to be driven by their need to annoy me. So, but yeah, so the first step in a cycle is always going to come down to this: not quite aware enough to accept accountability, but aware enough to recognize that there is a problem somewhere, or there is something that's arising, or there is a repeating pattern that isn't necessarily for your highest good. But I will say that once you have walked this cycle a few times and kind of recognize that there is definitely a pattern. So I'll use myself for an example. Why are my friendships ending this way? Right? Because they keep ending this way, and I can talk about it until I'm blue in the face. But at some point, I'm going to have to recognize who I am inside of these relationships, what it is that I need to be doing differently, what it is I need to be more accountable for, the responsibilities that I carry inside of the repeating cycle. Because cycles can either be a circle or a spiral. And let me assure you, you do not want a circle, because circles don't get you anywhere. They get you right back to the top of talking about it. But a spiral can shoot you out into a new understanding of why this cycle or pattern continues to happen.
So there was an approach that we looked at once called psychosynthesis, and the way that they described it was where you'd become aware of something and you would spend some time reflecting on that, and as though you were then going down the spiral to what they would say was the gift, but it could be that unpleasant place where you reflect on what's happening, why is it happening, who's it involved, what's that about.
Yes, I agree. And that is correct. What's it about? Where am I at? Why am I feeling this way? Why is this repeating itself? And through that level of contemplation, it brings you naturally into the second step. You know, we have this, I've talked about this before, where we externalize, where we like to point the finger. You know, it's this person's fault, or this group of people's fault, or this marketing tool, or this advertising tool's fault. You know, this is why. And then at some point you kind of get fed up with that, and you're like, well, this keeps happening and I keep doing it. So there's got to be something inside of me that's allowing this to happen. And so you get to naturally step into this second stage of the cycle, which is like a contemplation stage, where you get to begin really assessing on a deeper level why this problem exists, why these things keep occurring. But there's really, I don't know how to put this plainly. So when you reach the second stage of the cycle where you're starting to acknowledge, hey, there is some things inside of this that maybe I am not the victim in, maybe I've created some of this myself, but you're not quite ready to take the steps for that change, right? You're just contemplating it. You're thinking a little bit deeper. You're going a little deeper inside of that cycle. You're going a little deeper inside of the spiral, into the depths of your unconscious you're beginning to tap into. So that's kind of where the second step leads us, is into the acknowledgement that, well, perhaps I have responsibility in this. And what are the steps, if any, that I can take to do it? Now, you're not taking the steps yet. You're just contemplating the steps.
Yeah. So the first aspect is there are people who will just blame everything outside of themselves. Mm-hmm. So if somebody's at that phase, there's often no reasoning, they've got to come to that conclusion themselves. But you're right. Once you're able to take some accountability for your part in the way that your life is unfolding, for the good and the what doesn't feel so good, because often that's about our perspective. And it can be, sometimes it is a dawning moment. It can be that, I've met these people and they all seem to have this same attribute that triggers the same response in me, that ends up with me feeling powerless,
right,
not heard, not valued, whatever it is. And those things can play out. They play out a lot in the workplace, or it's in the family situation when such and such person is around. This is what happens, or every time I get this bill, this is a response I have.
Yeah.
And they're indicators, aren't they? Those responses and those feelings you have are the indicators. And that's what you're referring to, is you sit back and you have a look at that and then say, okay, so what do I want to do about that? And right. It's a bit like the classic cycle is the one that most people go through every Christmas and every New Year, or every celebration followed by everybody going on a diet. And, and we attempt the same sort of ritual each time, because you can start to become aware of your own role within the situation that you're in, whatever that situation is that you're not happy about, and then start to make attempts to make some changes. But then there's a whole range of other steps involved in that you can be, like I said earlier, you can be detoured, because it's sometimes anxiety, people get anxiety mixed up sometimes anxiety is a sign that actually you should be moving ahead. It's just that your body's wanting you to stay on the couch,
right.
And yet there's another part of you that's like, grow, I want to expand, I want to go out and have a social life.
Right. But that's that brain, that ego form of your brain that says, well, no, this is new, and I'd rather sit here in discomfort because I know what this feels like. And this is, I'm used to this. This is the familiar. Yeah. And then now we have this path that begins to open a little bit. And you're like, wait, I feel like there's some light over there, and it's much better than this darkness. So what do I do? And it's funny because the next step, that third step, is your intention, right? And when do we normally take intentions? We do those on the new moon, when it's the darkest in the sky. So when it's at your darkest and you've come to this realization that things are not going in the way you want them to go, in the way that your soul is calling you, the way that your mind is telling you, that little quiet part of your mind, not the loud one, the quiet one that sits there and says, hey, maybe it's time to make some changes. And that's where that third step comes in for intention. And on a spiritual side of things, the new moon is the perfect opportunity to write those intentions down and say, these are the changes that I want to make in my life. I am intending that these thoughts that now are, that these thoughts that I spoke about that are now deeper penetrating thoughts that are, I'm now ready to take the step. I'm now ready to say, let's put into action the things that I've been contemplating on for however long, and let's see where we can take this, because I know X, Y, and Z isn't working for me, but maybe A, B, C will. So let's go ahead and write these down, put them in fire and water, depending on the moon. And, just deciding that this is the day I change. This is the day that I'm going to effectively start the process of change. And from that point forward, you really do start being consciously aware of it, conscious and active in the pursuit of the new pattern or trying to alleviate the cycle. It's, for me, it's one of the most empowering moments in this journey is, okay, this is I don't want to be there anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. What's out there? I want to go out where I just saw a little bit of light. How do I get there? And you start to write the steps down, make the steps, be it internally. I always recommend to write it down. It really does. There's something about tangible evidence of what it is that you want that changes things inside your mind. So
yeah, and that's well documented by a lot of people who say that the process, it's not even typing it on a laptop, it is actually physically getting the act of picking up a pen and connecting your conscious mind with your unconscious mind, which is what happens for a lot of arts and poetry and music, and that you're making that connection. But I think you're highlighting a really important step, which is about intention setting. And again, that often seems to sit in spiritual circles. But what we're sort of talking about at the moment is combining almost like the three theories, which is the CBT cycle of be aware of what your thinking is, then aware of what feelings are activated in that process, and then what behavior normally follows that. And that's how you start to see what that cycle is. It's a very simplistic way of looking at CBT, and it is quite an easy thing to learn. And then the cycle of change itself is understanding, where am I in this space of, I'm starting to recognize that I can't continue with this mindset, with this behavior, with this thing that I'm doing or not doing. And then the next one is using the attention setting of, okay, I don't quite know what the light really is telling me. I don't know what it's going to look like when I go over there. All I know is that I don't really want to stay in the space that I'm in at the moment for whatever reason. And the whole purpose is to make the decision. Okay, I now decide that I want better. I want to feel better. I want to feel positive. I want to have a life that looks like this. And whether I mean, a lot of people used to do courses on things like mood boards, where you'd get a picture of the house that you want and the car that you want and things like that. But you can do that through laying in your bed. You know, you set yourself the intention of relaxing really deeply and putting on some really relaxing music and laying there and really starting to play around with your own imagination and conjuring up all the colors, all the sounds. If you're someone that's able to visualize, if it's a struggle to visualize, you feel into it. What would I feel like when I'm experiencing these things that I would really like? What is that? And a phrase that I use a lot, and it's come from somewhere, I don't know, because a lot of what I think has come from somewhere and everywhere, is milking it. Yeah, is milking it, is staying, drenching yourself with those feelings. And if you're not sure what it is that's going to be different, you reach for something that maybe you've experienced at some point in your life that was a feeling that is similar to the one you're reaching for, the exhilaration or the happiness or the joy or the feeling of what happens when you make a decision and it works out, and how good does that feel? You know, I was deliberating on X for ages, and then I made the decision, and actually it was the best decision I ever made. And if we've had decisions like that, they're great, and we really need to milk them, because we forget that we procrastinated so long prior to that, or just stayed in that place of, I don't know what to do. Shall I go for this job? Shall I do that? Shall I do, you know? And so we set the intention, and the intention aspect is so important.
It is. The intention aspect, you know, for me, it's so courageous. It's bravery. It's, you know, the fear of the unknown is real. The fear of change is a very, very real thing. It's paralyzing. You know, we'll go back to our fight or flight conversation. You know, it can freeze you in a moment of never ending, just perpetual sameness. And so to be able to take that step and say, I want this change, I am worthy of this change, and not even knowing what that change is going to end up as, what you're going to possibly lose, what you're going to possibly gain. You
Right.
don't know. And so it's such a huge step for a person to say, I am making this intention of change. And I feel like we don't give enough credit for that step in the process, because it's one thing to be unconscious to the things that you're doing, because you're just doing them and you don't even know. You don't know why. You don't know the reasons behind it. You're just doing it. You're blind. You're not awakened to it. And then the awakening occurs, and it's like, okay, I
You
have
start to notice it.
responsibility. Yeah, I have to take this on. And then when you take that step for intention that says, no more, no more, I'm going to change.
No
I
more.
don't care if I lose this, or I have to sacrifice something, because it's worth it to me now. That takes a level of bravery and courage that we really need to be able to applaud and pat ourselves on the back a little bit for, because it's a tough step.
And it's a tough step. I think the reference to fear is a really key one too, because often our fears are almost like, skeletons in the cupboard that, when it's dark, you see all these shadows, you put on the light and they don't exist anymore, and it's this idea that if I do this, your brain will conjure up all of these things, especially if you're someone that's grown up in a family where the glass is half full or half empty, and you've got these patterns in your mind or connected to some outdated core beliefs that if I do this, this is what's going to happen, or they'll think this, or that'll happen, or it won't work out, or even like what you said, they don't even realize they deserve to live a happier, healthier way of being. So the fear itself, and again, that can be in the unconscious mind. They're not necessarily aware that they won't take some steps sometimes to do things because they're just not aware that they are living a life that's been created safely, and that's as much as they can manage. So you're right, it is courageous. And it reminds me, I think we've talked on other occasions when I was part of, by fluke, setting up a social group with some friends. And one of the things that I was so sort of keen to just market really as the idea, it wasn't about we're doing really nice dinners, or we're going to bars, or we're going to meet down the river and have a picnic, because the idea of the social group was where we would post different events and people could just join the group and come to whichever events. But the biggest hurdle for everybody was leaving their house, was making a decision and getting off the sofa. And I knew that when I'd done that, I was sort of fudging my way through, because I was in the academic world, and I'm like, no, I like reading, I like studying, and I thought, no, I need to get out and just be a bit social. But I know the steps of getting out and going somewhere and meeting people that you've not met before, or walking basically over the threshold of making that decision. But the rewards for making that decision were so huge that I couldn't have, even if I'd have sat with a coach and they would have said, imagine what it could look like when you do that, I wouldn't have even been able to imagine all the rewards that came as a result of that. I made new friends. I found loads of places I would never have gone to myself. I could experiment with these things. But it did, you're right, it took courage. And everybody feels some level of fear of, or this thought process of people they don't go on their own, and you should go with friends. And one of the freeing things about these social groups is that you didn't have to wait for your friends to want to do the same thing as you to go and do the thing. And that was what was really freeing for people. They could pick and choose according to what worked for them, for what they were attracted
knowing
to
that
doing.
they were not going to be alone in that they were going to be able to step out, and there was going to be like-minded in that arena.
Yeah, people who were doing the same.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. And you're right. It's when we make our intentions, we can only see so far down the road.
Yeah.
Right. There's only so far we can see. So when that intention manifests itself into this reality, there's miracles laced within it. There is magic laced within it that you couldn't even begin to
even imagine.
acknowledge. Yeah, you can't even begin to acknowledge, even in the most basic of ways, you know. There's been these levels of intentions that I've made that when I came out of it, the manifestation of it has been so profound in its details, the things I would have never thought of.
Even, yeah.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have even come to you. Yeah. And I think if people look back at certain times in their life, they'll probably find one or two like that. And whether that is a job move, a house move, and they're big things, but it can be very subtle things.
Yeah.
Like we've talked before of, oh, I think I'll just walk to the coffee shop. And then all of a sudden I've had a day of really nice conversations with people, or I go and try an activity or an event. Because the beautiful thing about this is on the smaller, subtler level of not the big stuff like moving, is that you can just say to yourself, well, I'm going to cross the threshold and I'm going to try it out. Yeah. And I'll either love it or just be neutral about it,
just
or
be
hate
neutral.
it.
And if I hate it, and this just goes back to the thing that you always talk about, which is becoming the curious scientist.
Yeah.
Go and be curious. There's not a wrong decision, right? Once you make the choice is made, and you can learn from it. And most of the time it is just a learning pattern, be it a positive or what we perceive as a negative pattern or learning experience. You've still done that, you know, even these subtle, we talk about the bigger things, but there's also, as you were just saying, these subtler energies that you can change, which is, I don't really like to run errands or leave my house much. It's too people-y out there. And so my husband invited me a couple of days ago to go run this errand in another town with him. And it's only about 45-minute drive. And my first reaction was no. And I have my laundry list of valid excuses. And then I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to go. I'm just going to do it. We can make this work. And so I got around, did it. We ended up having a great conversation on the way there. We, laughed. We went to dinner, which is, with a person, when you have as many kids as we do, getting out of the house just for a date night can prove difficult.
It's a challenge. Yeah.
It's a challenge. And so we ended up getting this unexpected date night where we got to try a new restaurant and we got to spend this time together that wasn't inside of a house. We got to, have this, this beautiful experience that I otherwise would have not had. And I stuck to my normal pattern. And I was very appreciative of the break in the cycle, knowing that it just takes a quick yes or no to change everything that would happen for you in that day, be it a subtler thing like my date night, my unexpected date night, or a large thing like deciding to move, or deciding to take that job. So so that just leads us to the next step, which is action, right?
Yeah.
You've made the intention, right? You said, these are the things that I would like to see in a different way. And now we're in the process of taking the steps. We're talking cycles, but cycles and patterns are very closely related, because inside of that cycle, they're teaching you to change the pattern.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so now you're in action. So now you really imagine yourself, with a pattern in front of you, and then just take that one piece of the pattern and move it to the left. What does it look like now? Oh, that was a little freeing. Let's try this again. And does this pattern work for me? Now we're back into that curious science, or that curious child mentality, which is, if I have learned from my past, I recognize that taking the exact same steps is not going to work for me. And regardless if that's from within and you're changing your steps, or your reaction from the external and saying, well, I recognize that normally I might have been passive in this situation. So now I'm going to be more on the aggressive side. And I don't mean aggressive like hitting, or yelling. Yeah. I mean more like standing your ground or responding in a new pattern, because some of us respond in anger. How about this time you respond in peace or just if you can't find that piece, you don't respond at all until you can find that piece, and then you make the response, right? This is all part of a natural pattern. And so when you start to put into action the things that you talked about that you realized you might have had some responsibility in, then you said, I'm going to make the intention to change this part. Now you're putting into action all of the things that are in your head, right? The things that you know that need to be changed, and allow those steps. Now, this is a really tough step. The action step is rough because now you have to walk your talk. Now you have to hold yourself accountable for the things that you just made intentions on, the things that you said, I am changing this. Now you have to go and who better than to hold accountable than yourself. Right? You're not going to shame yourself the way that you would feel the shame from an external source. Now you're just saying, I am worthy, I am deserving, I am brave and courageous enough to take these things and put them into action. And when I take these steps and I start to notice that these patterns feel familiar, I'm going to change them just a little bit and say, well, let's try this out. Let's play this round this way, and allow yourself to kind of move through this new pattern in a new flow, and allow yourself to make these changes in an active way.
Yeah, I think you're alluding to two things in a way as I'm listening. I think you've got patterns where people can look at, say, particular interactions maybe they've got with somebody, and every time they're with a particular person, it could be a partner, it could be a friend, something happens and they end up feeling not great about it. And that's like an obvious cycle where there is a uncomfortable feeling that follows the interaction that you've had, that you've been around several times. But I think as well, we've moved into a new space because there will be people who have done a lot of this work already, who have become aware of, like, the CBT cycle. Even if they've not read about CBT, they've become aware because there is so much available information now about, whether it's Abraham Hicks or the Greg Bradens, or all the different speakers out there that have got some kudos about them, are saying, notice what you think, notice what thoughts pass through your head, notice the feelings that generates in that. How does that feel? Okay, it doesn't feel great. Shift your thoughts, shift your feelings, shift your behavior. And so I think there are a lot of people out there that have done a lot of this work, because while you were talking, I was thinking, I'm aware of, say, these patterns that play out with particular interactions I might have, or things, annual anniversaries can do the same thing. And I'm talking about getting the MOT for my car, sometimes once a year, take the car, sit there like I'm at a hospital waiting for a child to be born, waiting for them to tell me whether or not this is going to cost me a lot of money or it's passed. And I think I celebrated more at the garage a couple of weeks ago because my car flew through it, because I really thought it was going to cost me a lot of money based on a previous service it had had. So I was like, no, it's going to be fine. The car's going to be great and all of that. And the pattern in me was like, no, but what if it isn't? And that is something that I was kind of really aware of. But then there are very subtle patterns as well, and new experiences. There is something new happening, I think, for a lot of people, because, and you were part of this, because, when I sent you pictures of last Friday night, my pattern for years on a Friday night since the kids were small was either they would go to their grandma's and I would get, watch the TV, get a glass of wine or something and watch some TV. And I've been doing that mostly every Friday for years. And if I went out with my friends, it was a Friday or a Saturday. And I knew this about myself. I knew that this is how I like to do it. Like what you just said, you're at home, you don't really want to go out. You don't, same as me, I don't enjoy shopping and things like that, because I just got, oh, you know, there isn't any reason, justification for me to do some of those things. But like today, I had to go out. I had no food in the cupboard, so I had to go out to the supermarket. And but last week was different, and it was something that just came to me in the moment, because it was like, me and my son were home. He often goes out on a Friday. You know, he's a young man now, and he wasn't going out. I wasn't going out. And I said, oh, should we get some food? Should we get some Chinese? Yeah. And then that's where I said, oh, should we get a drink? And, you know, when we've never really drank as family. And then we just sit down chatting, and then we were playing music, and it just turned into where we both had this idea. He's got a portable speaker attached to his phone, and I've got a portable speaker attached to my phone, and I played a tune, and I was like, what do you think of that? And then we decided to make this game of getting the right beat, you know, like what a DJ does.
Yeah.
And whether or not he could match the beat by the next tune that he found. And then,
oh, that's so fun.
It was amazing. And so we and you know, like if you go on YouTube and you start putting in tracks, so we started putting all the old school stuff in that we used to play, that took us back to the memories, because I can be a bit repetitive. So if I like a tune, I can play that for 50 times, 100 times.
Yes.
And then it took us back to this place where one of the old cars that I had a CD player in it. I used to burn my own CDs, and I had like an album pretty much of Tupac, 50 Cent, The Game, all of that. And I used to play that over and over again. And I put a track on the other night, and I was just like, oh no, I remember this. You played this. Like,
so you got this beautiful bonding moment, this experience with your kid that you wouldn't otherwise had.
Not planned at all.
Yeah, you had stuck to the pattern of, you know, disappearing on the
just
weekends.
Going, yeah, all right. See, you know, I'm not doing anything. Let's just chill. But the next, it leveled up. So the word leveled up was coming to me last week. It leveled up to a whole different experience we were having together, because when he got his speaker out, it was fun. And I put on a track, and then he found one that was going to match it. And we tried to blend the two. And a couple of times it just worked really well. And it went, I love that. It was magical. It was
that's exactly what that is. As when you made the intention to do the thing, you never knew at the end what it was going to manifest,
where it was going to go.
Yeah. And it ended up being this amazing thing for you. Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's beautiful. And that is action all the way. Right.
Yeah. It was just a shift in decision, but I hadn't even sat and set the intention in that moment. But I think I had set the intention months earlier.
Yes, you had. I actually can remember this from you. Yeah. Because, you know, we've been through this, this universal cycle, this collective cycle, recently under the Aquarian moon, that it's about family and the things that we want to see within our family, be it more love, more time spent, more bonding. Just there's a laundry list of things that we want.
Yeah. But it's like, what do you want? Yeah.
Right. And so then the universe bursts back this beautiful reflection of what you've been working on, what you had already made an intention on, manifested right in front of you in a way that was profound. And I'm sure you're still gathering little tidbits of its sacred nature.
It was such and I think we was up until my other son came back. It was like 1:30 in the morning.
You know, that though,
we were up for hours,
but it's worth it, right? It's like, okay, I can make this change for this thing. Yeah, I'm really in love with that, because Mel, I mean, honestly, when you have adult children, it has this tendency to not by any means break the bond, but it does there's an elastic band almost that stretches, because they're in a different phase of their life. You're now in a different phase of your relationship. So to have that moment come back in such beautiful clarity of where the love truly is and how much you truly do enjoy each other's company. It would, I mean, I'm sure you're still living on little bits of that energy that push through and finding new sacred moments inside of just the entirety of it all.
Oh yeah. And I was going back to the milking it idea, because I woke up and I was still feeling that vibration, that bliss. And I kept on reflecting on, wow, wasn't that brilliant? And
So
what I
deserving.
also thought is, because the only reason we are still living together really is because when he come back from uni, you know, and he now was working from home, and
Right.
that, you know, everybody's lives has been hit in so many different
Yeah.
ways because of COVID.
Yeah.
And relationships, some of them have sunk and some of them have gone. And I thought the itch and the rub and the frustration and the difficulties you have sometimes when you've got whether it's lots of kids in the house or you've got adults who are your grown-up children, who these ideas about who you are and who they are can rub up against each other sometimes. You know, and sometimes it was almost like, this is the end of a tough journey. This was the celebration. This was a magical moment that I could never have anticipated, that made the journey really worthwhile.
And that's just it. Anytime that we feel that it's that moment to change, that moment to make the new steps, create the new pattern, you know, I have not had one cycle breaking experience that did not end up better than I could have even imagined.
Yeah.
There's not been one time that I set in alignment what it was that I was going to expect, and that those expectations weren't blasted out of the water, that I didn't get that and then more and more and more, just depending. Yeah. And you know, and so what that does is help you in that next step of the cycle, which is the maintaining of this new
way of being.
Yeah, this new way of being, the epiphany moment that you just had, because you put into action something that you were afraid of doing, and instead of it not going according to plan, it ended up being better than you ever expected. And sometimes that better comes with a little pain. You know, that better comes with, you know, because not everything ends up, you know, bright and shiny with the date night, or bright and shiny with a family fun night. Sometimes it ends up in a breakup. Sometimes it ends up in leaving an employment, you know, a place of employment. Sometimes it requires you to move out of that house. And so there is some pain involved in some of these
in the process.
In the process of it.
Yeah.
But at the end of that process, it makes all of that hard work, all of that perceived suffering come into a fruition of light that you wouldn't have otherwise had if you continue to walk that cycle, if you continue to walk that path. So the maintenance side of that, once you put into action, you have that epiphany of, oh my gosh, this thing just turned out better than I expected. Because if we put our faith and trust in ourselves and in the universe or whatever, if you don't even believe in a higher power, that's totally fine. If you just put that faith in yourself, you'll be surprised at the reflection back, and how you won't ever lose something that wasn't yours in the first place, you know, that didn't belong to you. And so these things that belong to you are more than you think. That you deserve these experiences in your life that are on a higher frequency or at a higher level. You deserve these experiences in your life to occur naturally without you getting in the way of them. And so as we got in the way of them from the initial point of the cycle, as we were walking the circle, we kept getting in the way of our blessings. Well, now you're in a position where you're starting to receive those blessings. You're starting to see the blessings. You're starting to acknowledge the blessings, and you put into action. And now you're maintaining those blessings. You're maintaining this new pattern that's working out for you. And to maintain this pattern, it becomes easier and easier, because what you've already seen is that it's working.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really all you need to know. And then the feeling is there, and it's a little brighter now at the end of that tunnel. That light is a little stronger. That light is beginning to fill up those dark corners. As you said, the skeletons in your closet aren't as skeleton-y as you thought they were. They're actually kind of like transparent and not really there if you were to brush the cobwebs off, and you're like, oh, well, my bad, I was scared for nothing. Right.
Yeah.
And so you know, once you've gotten that epiphany moment of, whoa, I just saw myself change, I just saw this in action, the changing, and now I'm maintaining that change. What happens when you relapse? What happens when you fall back into those patterns, which is going to happen? And I don't mean you're
Yeah.
not the major ones, because you're going to see the big patterns. You're going to see that, this did not work for me. And when I changed it, it worked for me. So you're going to hold on to those patterns. That's just a natural thing. But now the subtler patterns start to show up, and the cycles, then like, wait, you're repeating things just in a more subtle form. Even though you might not be actively trying to, they're still there, meaning that there's still some unconscious levels yet to reveal themselves. But you've been here before now, right? Now you've been here before. Now the things that you need to talk about aren't going to be talked about as long, because you've been here before. Right. And now you know that there's a pattern to this. So let's figure that pattern out. And then that cycle starts over again. And now you're walking in the spiral, and you want to be at that spiral, because the circle, again, it leads nowhere. It leads in a circle. A spiral, I like to imagine it as almost like what are those called, where you pulled back, you put like a piece of like a rock or something in it, and you pull it back, and like a slingshot. So at the bottom of the spiral is like a little slingshot. And once you reach the bottom of that spiral, it slingshots you out into your next cycle. So if you haven't completed the cycle and you have to walk back into that spiral, that's okay too, because it's not going to be as hard this time, because you've taken the tools that you already have, that you've learned along that first journey of that cycle. And you're going to say, now we're going to refine these tools. Now we're going to put more things into action. Now I have more confidence in myself to do these things, because the last time I did this, it worked in my favor.
And you're highlighting something that I've realized over all the work that I've done with people. Other key things is having faith and hope. And so part of the journey that we assist and facilitate people who come to any of our projects that may be in a place that just doesn't feel great, and there's lots of really difficult things going on. And if there's a lot going on, that you have to sift and sort several of those things. But the moment one thing has been focused on and they have changed the thought process, or applied basically what you're saying, applied those tools, we then are able to say, look at what happened when you did that, look at the outcome that you got. And then that inspires hope and faith. And this is not a religious way of looking at it. For some, it sits in with the religious ideas.
And it can be, if you want it to be, you can make this, there's a religious cycle pattern that you can follow, that you can online search it, right? You can online search it. There is a religious cycle pattern, and it's all, give to God, make the prayer, do the things. And there's a psychological pattern to it. And then there's a spiritual pattern. Now, the beauty of the spiritual and psychological pattern is they really do kind of hold hands on the journey. And the psychological pattern might be a little more, sorry, Mel, it might be a little more like self-involved, like self-righteousness. So I need to use the big words, right? I'm not talking about you specifically, just the field in general. But spirituality married to the psychology terms simplifies it for the layman, for the common person to acknowledge that this is not out of my reach, that this is something I don't need to assign a big label to it, or a big word to it, or a lengthy definition to it, to know that I can do this. And so when you marry these two beautiful worlds, even if you were to marry religion and psychology, you're going to find a happy medium. Psychology is a base point for a lot of things that make it tangible in this world, and you just pick the way you want to approach it, right?
It's about finding a theory that sort of fits with your view. So if it's religious, if it's psychology, if it's spiritual, whichever, all of them contained within them have tools, whether that is prayer, meditation, gratitude, and all of those have a place in this process of moving you away from suffering. And if we can look at suffering from lots of different angles, but suffering is really just that experience of being either in a situation or a mindset, because actually we probably create more of our own suffering from the outdated patterns and beliefs that we have about ourselves and other people than anything else.
It's true.
And
we don't mean to. We really don't mean
well,
to.
no,
It's
because
not like you wake up.
Yeah.
You don't wake up and say, oh, you know, like
I'm
I
gonna
decided
make
I'm going to
myself
suffer today.
Yeah.
And nobody wants the suffering, but you and I would not be. But generally speaking, you would be surprised at how many people would rather sit in their suffering than to make the change. So congratulate yourself every time you decide to make that change, because it is a brave act to do in a world that does not want you to change, in a world that wants you to be exactly the same so that they can fit you nicely in the box that they've created for you. Yeah. And so once you decide that suffering is not the flavor that you want to taste, then it's time for us to move forward. Now, I will tell you that when you're doing these cycles, and I did not do a good job of this, and this is something that I would love to have done, and so I recommend it now for future use, is writing this stuff down. What worked, what didn't work, what were the pros to it, what were the cons when you became the scientist of it, when you became curious in nature and you started changing these patterns, what was the things that influenced you, what were the things that triggered you, and when you write those down, you now are writing down your pattern. You are now writing down the things that did and did not work. And so when you have this cycle come up for you again, and you might be able to graduate it the second time, right? Or maybe you learned the lesson so well that you got it on the first try, because the cycle is always going to reappear to see if you learned the lesson or not.
Or these just subtle, like what you're saying, subtler forms of that. So if you've got big stuff that you're dealing with, when it's big, because it feels big, that can overtake your thinking process, and that's where people lose sleep and end up over a long period of time, if they're stressed all the time, end up in a really bad space, because the longer that stays with you, the longer you're in a situation that is harmful to you, that you just know deep down isn't right, the longer your body is going through tortuous experiences, because it's getting flooded consistently with these stress chemicals. And we know that over a long period of time, getting flooded with stress chemicals is going to affect our immune system, it's going to affect our heart, it's going to affect absolutely everything. And so one of the issues with that is, the longer we stay with something that isn't right for us, that is, or even that is obviously harmful, the longer we do that, the harder it can be to either make a step forward. Because one of the things I have seen is, you've got people who just grow up like what you're saying and experience life in whatever way they experience it and do what they're doing, and without any real thought. And we will start to think about things because either the relationships that we're in aren't working out, or something's happened at work. But we don't have to call our attention to it. We can blindly walk about and be totally unaware of who we are and the impact that we're having around us, in whatever mood or state that is. Because it could be just you're grumpy and angry all the time, or you're not bothered. It's just you don't know until something so big that is you don't want to risk is often the calling that says, I'm at risk of losing this wonderful person in my life because I'm just acting like this all the time. And for other people, they won't necessarily know any of that, but they might start to apply some techniques, but the people around them are so influential and powerful and have so much to say that even if there's a small voice inside of them that says, hang on a minute, I'm not sure about that, they lack so much trust in themselves and their own well-being, their own journey, that they will be influenced by that. And even if you clear away half of those stressors, those stress points, you can still have a lot to deal with. And so in a way, the journey can feel excruciating for those to release, because in a way there are similarities, say, like with addiction, you're partaking in things and food and products and people that are not good for you. So what you have to do is let go of your need, your desire, to have those things and people in your life that are actually harming you, that are harmful to your well-being.
They call it that, and it's surrendering.
Surrendering, right? And letting go of attachment, and
just the realization that, hey, this is not healthy for me, and I'm having a hard time letting go of it because it's harming me, and I recognize it's harming me, but for whatever reason I cannot let go. This is the moment of surrender. You have to do the thing that is so scary for us, which is the need to control, the need to hold on to something that is maybe past its expiration date.
And like you say, we only have the vision of where we're at.
Yeah.
So even if you know that where you're at doesn't feel great, it might not be powerful enough to motivate you to do something different.
Right.
And because if we've grown up, and we've talked about this before, if you grow up in a family where there was only ever aggression and violence, there weren't loving relationships, and everyone's disenfranchised. If you grow up in situations like that you can get to these pivotal points in your own life and only think that it's going to go disastrously wrong, because it went disastrously wrong in every other occasion, not realizing, because you can't see it. You can't see an image if you've never been introduced to the possibilities of true. What is there.
It really is. But I would like to say, just through my own journey, that I really did have this negative outlook, because this is just the way it's always been.
Yeah.
And what does it matter if I make that change? But I made the change anyway, right? And I just
what made you say, I'm going to make the change anyway, though?
Because it wasn't working the way it was.
And even though it wasn't working the way it was, what drove it to the point where you thought it really isn't working? Where did it get so ramped up that you moved to the next step? What was it?
Well, I can tell you the initial one. And then from there, it was like almost a new, like, once you feel the power of change, it's like I went directly for that, because if this one moment could change everything for me, I'm just going to keep going towards that. So the tower moment for me was, I had just lost my mom. I had adopted 3 new kids. I had a failing marriage. I was not keeping quality friendships in my life. And I was in such a dark space that it was like, it's not that I didn't like myself. I thought I was a pretty cool person. I enjoyed myself. But I was ready to go. I was ready to cut ties with everything that's
and just throw the towel in
and just throw it all in. Right. And then it was like, I have too much responsibility in this life to throw it all in. I have these 3 new kids. I've got 6 children now that need their mother, or a feminine form in their life to show them motherly qualities. Who am I to check out on that? Right. And so it was my life was kind of at a halting point. Like, there was no forward movement after that. And so I had to make the change. I had to choose in that moment myself. And myself was my soul, was my heart was very ready for that change. And so the tower moment for me was just that my whole world had just kind of come to a stop. Everything I had worked hard for was disappearing on me. Everything I wanted in my world had changed, and I just didn't know what else to do. So I threw my hands up. I was like, okay, I don't know what else to do. And the lightning bolt happened. This is partly on you. And I was like, okay, it's partly on me. Well, that sucks. And like you were saying, at that point, everything was so big, all of the change, because this was all in a matter of months, all of this was happening. So like, all of this big change was happening, and I couldn't keep up. There was nothing I could do. So I just stayed still. And for the first time in my life, I froze and I couldn't do anything. I was riddled with fear. I didn't know another step. And I just stopped. And in that stopping and that surrendering my need to be right, and my need to be the victim, and my need to be the person whose life was over, was when the change started happening. But from that point forward, I didn't need tower moments like I did before. After that one, it was like, if it doesn't feel good, I would like to make the change. And so I just really focused on that. How did it make me feel? If it didn't feel good, I needed to find the way out. And so that tower moment occurs, but it doesn't have to occur for every time. If you begin to pay attention at that tower moment, that initial tower moment where everything, the lights kind of come on for you, you can start focusing in different arenas of your life without the major tower moments happening, without the whole life ending experiences happening. You can start to see how these patterns are going to lay out, how these things are going to start to happen, and how you can play your part in that cycle. And by changing your part, you can change an entire cycle. And you're not changing another person. You're not changing their view. You're not changing another anything. You're changing yourself. And people either rise up to meet that change or they fall away. And you're not even an eighth of concerned about the things that fall away as you were prior, when you needed the control and you needed to hold on so tightly because of the fear of the change.
But what's fascinating about what your experience indicates is they're all big things. Marriage falling apart, you've inherited. As much as that was a choice to do that, you know, you didn't bat an eye.
I didn't really feel it was a choice, but yeah.
But it was a big shift.
Yes.
And your mum passing,
Yeah.
all major things. But what you indicate in this is that it wasn't any of the external stuff. Obviously the external stuff had changed because your mum passing and the kids coming to live with you was a huge thing. But it had also, whatever was going on for you was directly, I've got to look at me. I've got to look at me in this. And you're right. Sometimes you can do that. And what isn't going to come up to your level now of where you've moved into will fall away anyway. But this wasn't one of those throw in the towel moments, was it?
No.
And sometimes that's the path that somebody needs to go on, which is
you need to
I'm walking
retrace
away
your
from
steps.
this. And for other people, like you say, you focused on yourself, and that's to really look at what was it you were believing, thinking, feeling that needed to shift.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what time period that was until you start to see some evidence of the work you were putting in. Not long.
Not long at all. Well, let's see. It's been a little over 2 years since all of this began. And I am nowhere near the position I was 2 years ago. We're talking 3 months. I was starting to see, I'm not talking subtle change. I'm talking significant changes in my existence after 3 months of dedicated work on myself. Because I decided finally I was worth it. If nobody else in this world found me worth it, I'm going to find myself worthy. And I found myself worthy enough to make the change. And I just did it. And I did it. And there was no looking back for me. And I know that my storyline of change doesn't necessarily reflect everybody in society's storyline of change, because I went all in, because I now I know that was my path. But if I can take the level of significance that was happening in my existence, because all of those were very significant in my life, if I could take all of that heat and still remain in that kitchen and still saying, I deserve this, and I'm going to whip something up beautiful, then I really think that a person making 1 change, 2 change, 3 change, and just allowing the cycle to take, you really will. And again, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. By the 1 year mark, you wouldn't have recognized me. By 1 year, I was a new person entirely from within. At 2 years, I don't recognize me. I don't remember who that girl was anymore, that scared, frozen girl, because I was a runner or a fighter. I never froze. And I froze, and I needed that freezing moment. I had to stop what I was doing. I was thinking of going through a divorce with 6 kids, and I didn't have a job. I'm glad I chose not to, because I could not be more in love with my life and my family than I am right now.
Do you know what you have brought forward though is fascinating, when we're talking about cycles and patterns, is the what you just said is sometimes we can respond to the current biggies, like, you know, the house, the kids, the work, all of that, from that space that we experienced as a continuous pattern when growing up. You said you was a runner, you know, um, and I remember growing up and witnessing what happened when things got too much. And my mum was a runner and she had these patterns. And so I saw this cycle play out a lot, to the point that we all became fairly disenfranchised as a family.
Right.
You know, everybody went off, but the connections were severed. The connections were weak, and then they were severed. And it is incredibly difficult to ever reconnect if, you know, if the connections were never strong or they're severed. And I watched these things play out because I was the last of four in the family. And I remember early on in, you know, when I first got married, of having, when things got tough, of having these really strong feelings of wanting to run, of wanting to not face it, of wanting to throw the towel in, because that is what I'd seen. I'd not seen it. And I remember talking this very early on in my training, of saying to colleagues, I hadn't seen how two people could get together and communicate through any of the issues and find either a resolution or find a way of hearing each other out without
Right.
pointing the finger, without blaming, without saying, you do this, you do that. And I've seen this pattern through a lot of my friends as well, that if you only did this, I would be okay. If you stopped doing that, I'd be okay. If you picked up the towel, I wouldn't be tired every day. You know, all of these things that play out. And so it's almost like sometimes you've got to work out what is your classic pattern, and then say, and in that moment, it doesn't sound like that was a conscious decision to go, I'm going to freeze, but
because I didn't know what to do in that moment.
Yeah, so you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And if you're somebody that's always been, and we've talked before about some of the roles that we play when we're growing up, if you're the person in that role when you're growing up that either levels things out when things get tense, or you rescue people, or you resolve the problems, or you hide, whatever person you've been growing up, is usually you need to do the opposite, or become the different
because I was a fighter of the protection side, and I was a runner from relationships. You know, the going gets tough, I'm out the door, bye. You know, when it came to that kind of stuff. But in that moment, it was a frozen moment. I didn't have a whole lot of what I thought were choices in that. I was like, well, I can be a single mom of 6, or I can be in this loveless marriage.
Because you thought they were the only options.
I thought that was the only 2 options. And there was not much inside of either of them that I wanted.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to raise 6 kids by myself. That's a terrible thought. But I would have. Yeah. Right. Would I have been happy? Probably not. Because I loved my husband. I did. I loved him deeply. I mean, obviously I still do. But it put me in a moment of freeze, and I had to freeze. And I thank the universe, and I thank myself almost daily about walking those steps back, because that relationship was worth it. My relationship with my husband was worth it. You know, regardless of the patterns that we had created over the years, we were both in a space where one of us just needed to stand up and walk a new pattern. And I might as well lead the way, since I have the ability to do it. And I can see something that maybe he could not. And so when I chose myself, and so what you were just talking about, I will say a lot of cycles are going to revolve around detachment for people. You have to be able to detach. You have to be able, you know, you can't say if this person, if this person would just pick up their towels, or pick up their dirty laundry, or do the dishes, or insert whatever excuse to externalize the problem that you need.
Yeah.
Instead, if you reflect within and you begin to detach and say that person has their entire existence, that even I might share a bed and a home and a family with, but they are still exist outside of me. They have hopes, they have dreams, they have fears, they have nightmares. That is their journey. Who am I to tell them who and what to be? And
But
so,
also, if we sit contained in those relationships and say, if only she, might be a friend, did this and he did that, or your close relationships in your inner circle of, if he did this, I'd be, and again, like I said, I saw this play out with several friends. I had one friend who had a partner who was a lorry driver, and the nature of the work is on the road all the time, and by a certain time each day she'd be getting really stressed out and anxious and on the phone to him, and I'm like, what's going on? This guy's on the road.
right.
What is it? Why is this being projected towards him?
Yeah.
He's doing
that
all
was
the
an
things.
obvious one.
Yeah,
Gone.
that was, he's gone, he's doing his job. This poor guy's getting irate because he's just doing his job, and he's not quelling your anxiety. He's not satisfying your anxiety, because the anxiety was way back in her own childhood, and it was being activated through these events outside of her. It was actually nothing to do with her partner. He was doing that before they met. They signed up to be together. So the anxiety was hers, but the ownership had to be, I take responsibility for myself. Just as, I know as a parent, we do have a responsibility to model certain behavior to our children, because the children will reflect how we are operating within that system. So it is quite a responsibility, and sometimes you want to throw the towel in, and sometimes it's like, I'm so exhausted, I can't think straight, and you have to apply certain tools in that process. And I remember coming home from work a lot when they were younger, and there wasn't much of a gap between them coming back from school and me coming from work, or me bringing them back, and it'd be mommy, and I'd be coming through the door, and I just knew that by that time in the afternoon, between 2:00 and 6:00 at night, it's never been a good time for me to function. I can do basic functioning, but all of the other major work stuff would always go in early in the day or at night if I was studying. And I just put the rule in of, I need to get myself back together. Basically, I was grounding again. I was having a bath. I was having some time out for half an hour.
Transitioning from one dimension into another, from the reality of work into the reality of parenthood. And in your case, single parenthood, which was a lot.
Because it's, I mean, I did have their nan for a few years, and that was great. I had some respite, because for a lot of parents it can feel never ending, and it is never ending sometimes, that no matter how much you love your children, the process of shopping, school lunches, school bags, school clothes is, the happiest moment was when they left school and they didn't have to go in the summer to buy their uniform.
It's true. It's nice. It is. You don't have to make sure that certain things are matched, because children do not like to match.
Or that I'm going to get a phone call during a meeting because his pants have burst. Mom, I'm at school, can you come and pick me up?
And you're like, I can't. Okay, I guess I can. I have to. I'm the one that has to do it. But so when we are talking inside of cycles, there's cycles inside of cycles, inside of cycles, inside of cycles. And you just have to look at it as the spiral that it is. And maybe you didn't reach the root of the spiral. Maybe you only got 2 layers in, but that's okay, because those 2 layers in were the toughest layers for you. Those were the ones that you wanted to deny yourself of. And now that you're here and you recognize where you are, yet again, as the cycle starts to bring itself back around, now you're looking into these subtler patterns, and now you're really starting to focus on the things that maybe aren't as big and bright as the tower moment was, but now they're more subtle and conscientious, and in the recognition that your first go-to is self, because you learned that first cycle that you needed to look within. It required a look within. So
Yeah.
now I'm back here. Okay, let's look within. Where can I go from here? What is it that I'm doing? It's easy to sit yourself inside of a victim mentality and not even recognize it. You know, I've had friendships that you and I have talked through where I found myself just being so upset when in all reality, the friendship had just, it ran its course.
Always was what it was. It's just that now we've noticed it's not given us what we thought it was,
what we thought it was. And and even if maybe it did at one point, it no longer is serving.
Because we've grown.
And as you're the one that brought this to me, the value system changes. And once your value system, it changes, it doesn't make the person a bad person. It doesn't make the person a toxic person. What it makes them is different, that you're different than when you walked in the door to that relationship, or in, you know, be it through a friendship or a significant other, or even a work relationship. Things change. And if you're in the process of changing, you have to understand that some things that aren't going to change with you have to fall away. And when you hit those second, third, fourth areas of that cycle, depending on how deep in you are, you're going to start to really notice and see that for yourself.
Yeah, I think this leads really nicely. I just want to reflect on those processes, because anyone who's listening to this is what they can, we're bringing up things that they may resonate with, and there'll be different aspects of where they think, oh, actually, I'd like to do that. So I just want to reflect on the sort of tools that you've talked about, which is,
thank you.
One of the tools you've talked about is the cycle of change. And there are several cycles, and I think in motivational interviewing is where the cycle of change, if you go on Google or whatever, will come up, and it talks about that process that you've indicated, which is we're not aware necessarily of what's going on, and then we become aware. And even if we're aware, doesn't mean to say we're in action phase, right. But we might get in action phase and we start to make these changes, and then we have a relapse. And what you've brought into that model, that one model, is the other model of the psychosynthesis psychology of finding the spiral. And you go down and you go, oh, I've relapsed. What's happened? Let's go down. Let's sit in my living room for a half an hour and put some nice music on and reflect of what's gone on again. Let's go to this place and let's go and see what this thing is that's happened to me again. What gift can I get from that? And to recognize that in that process, there can be fear activated, because if you've never taken your attention to yourself, or you're scared of what you might find if you start to put your intention and attention there, then realize that the fear is just like the light that shines differently when you're in your room at night, that if you put the light on that and look at that, it's actually never as scary as we imagine it's going to be. And that's that process of fear. Then the process of the CBT triangle, cognitive behavior therapy, what they look at is, okay, what are the things that can get us in a bit of a mess? Is what were we thinking? Okay, so I walk down the street and I see somebody that I know, and they don't look at me. They look through me, and I might think they don't like me. Is it because of something I said last week? Are they? And I might go through this whole process of why is it they looked at me like that? Not realizing that person, and this is an entire
existence. Maybe they were lost in thought.
Maybe there were, and that's the thing, you see. So the first initial pattern, if we're not aware, will be to have these processes. Then we'll go into the feelings of anger, frustration. Yes. I'm going to tell them, then we'll start to play out the conversation we're going to have with them next time we see them. And
to the shower bottles.
and just go through this whole cycle. Then we're in the action phase of possibly next time we see them, I saw you a few weeks ago and you didn't even look at me, and they're totally oblivious, and you've wound yourself up for the last 3 weeks for nothing. Or you sit back and you go, is this got any validity? Is there any proof that that's going on? Okay, so they looked through me. Maybe they're like me. I wear contact lenses sometimes. I go out and I put stuff in the bin. I haven't got my contact lenses in, but I can just about see where I'm going. Right. And every time I go out to the bin, I see the neighbour across the road, and I can't make out the facial expressions, and it's hard. I find it hard to have a dialogue, and I'm conscious of that. And I said to him one day, I said, if I don't respond to you, it's because I haven't got my contact lenses in, I can't see properly. Because I picked up sometimes that, is he thinking that she's just moody? Sometimes she's really chatty, and other times she's looking through me, and I sort of conveyed that message to them. So that will be that start of that CBT cycle of, you have this thought. So let's look at the first thought you have. And is that thought real? And is it valid? Is there any evidence with that? We haven't really got any evidence. What are the other possibilities? Well, they could have been deep in thought. They've just got a bill in and they're really worried, or they have got to go to the doctor and they've got some health
maybe
issue.
they were in a bad mood and the last thing they wanted to do was have a
human
conversation. Yeah, and that's okay. You can't take this life personally in that way.
Yeah.
And what happens when you discover that you were wrong and you did the whole thing and you approached it right? Well, now we have to give ourselves that grace.
Well, that's where, and we won't necessarily go into it tonight, but that's what can happen next, is where we start to create this new karma, which is we have responded in a negative way because we've literally sent ourselves on internal circles and round this wrong loop. So that's the CBT cycle. We can learn to check out our thoughts, notice what feelings are activated when we think those thoughts. If we don't like the feelings that we're feeling, we need to work on changing the thoughts. If we want to create feelings that we want, we need to find the thoughts that link with those. So if I want to feel really good and blissful, I go back to Friday night when me and my son were doing the music thing and we had a lot of laughter. I can now generate, I'm not there, but I can now generate because I've practiced it. Because the key to it is coming out of the unconscious state of mind, going into the conscious state of mind, noticing what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and then using that to your advantage of then ramping up what works. So that's the CBT model. Then you alluded to the drama triangle. Yes. So you talked about victim, persecutor, rescuer. I think the whole of the world is, or at least 80%, 90% of it is in this. All of our relationships are, somebody does something to you and you get upset. We're in victim mode. We lose our power. We hand the power over to somebody else. When we see somebody else upset and we fight their corner, we become rescuer mode. And we don't always enable that person to find their power and speak their truth and support them to be in that space. And when we're in persecutor mode, that might be, we are the victim and our manager is the persecutor and they are micromanaging us and we hate them and they are our persecutor. So these cycles of victim, persecutor, rescuer in terms of the drama triangle are played out a lot. The information is on the internet. There's some really good descriptions of those models. They're really worth looking at. The last one that you mentioned, I think, is a really lovely exercise to do, that when we're really getting to know ourselves, and as we've talked over the weeks, we can do that through the gene keys, through human design, through tarot, through reading psychology, this
astrology, all kinds of things.
Yeah, a whole wealth of, and we'll tap in and out of that in all of our conversations, of finding ways to learn about ourselves, because it is important to learn kind of who we really are. And one of the ways to do that is, a lot of our beliefs are formed through our early years. So the beliefs about people, ourselves, what work we do, our role in society, all of that. And we talked a lot more about that when we talked about identity and the journey of the self. But if you want to figure out why you might feel off key with some of the things you're doing, is to do a values exercise. And again, you can go on the internet and you just put in I think it's called a value exercise, and basically you can get this sheet with all these words that are all values. There's about 75 of them, and you read it and you get your notepad out and you write down the ones that you're like, yes, that's definitely important to me, the ones that are sort of important to you, and the ones that aren't at all. And it's really interesting because sometimes we don't realize our values have shifted. And
Yeah.
that was what I recently was saying to you, that some of my values had really shifted, that what wasn't in the important campus was actually now in the really important camp.
Very important camp. Yeah.
Very important. And you might end up circling, say, 20 in the very important. And so if you're thinking, say, you want to find a job that you love, or you want to set up for yourself, you look at all those words that indicate values and you circle the ones that are important while you're thinking of the job, or while you're thinking of yourself in relationships, or so in relationships, it may be that the values in the relationships and the values in the work are slightly different.
And that's okay. Right.
And that's standard.
Yeah.
But where there's disharmony is if there's a lot of values that so if you value independence, free thinking, autonomy, teamwork, those kind of things that you might have in the workplace, you're going to really struggle if you've got to always work with a team, if you've got to you can only make decisions when you're in a team. If you like autonomy and you want to be able to work through decisions, then share that out just to check it out, not wait for everybody to agree with you.
Right.
Then these are the things that are going to cause the rub, that are going to create difficulties.
Yeah. Because you also have to be aware that once you're aware of those value systems, you have to kind of stick to them. Otherwise you're setting yourself up for a potential downfall or a tower moment inside of that. And you have to find that courage and bravery that we were talking about, and really instill those in your day-to-day manifestation, in your day-to-day intention. We intend to find our perfect mate, and then we lower our value system every time we make a choice to take it a step further, because maybe our gut was off, or maybe that was just a passing phase that this person was going through. And I'm not saying we have to deny people their growth, because people are going to grow in the relationship. But once you've hit a certain level and you're starting to recognize your value system, be it in the workspace or in an interpersonal relationship, every time you compromise on that value in a way that is harmful, you're compromising yourself in the work you've been putting in. And so you're setting yourself up for a tower moment. And you have to really acknowledge that the deeper you go. And I don't mean like I wasn't going to be able to pay my bills if I didn't take this job, because we grasp that. But you and I have been in those positions.
Well, that's a value at the time that works.
But that was the value, but your values are going to change.
Yeah.
Right.
So I valued being at home with my kids at the end of the school day. Luckily enough, the jobs that I was getting at the time, I could pick them up from school, because for 5 years I worked in schools. I wasn't a teacher, so I didn't have to do all the after school stuff. So I could then go and pick my kids up. I valued that. And there were times, and as they got older, I then valued the freedom and autonomy not to rush about everywhere at 3 o'clock.
Right.
So it shifted, and I was able to do that. And I guess we're in a society more now where the idea of flexi working, part-time working, because women wouldn't necessarily get the same pay, or they won't get the pensions, and there was a whole distorted way of having employees in the workplace. Whereas, and that's changing even more now as we speak, in terms of everything that's happened this year. Yeah. And I value calm environments, calm and noise-free environments. And I was just telling some colleagues today, and I can't believe this now. And this is what also strikes us, is sometimes we can be living with something that we think is okay, because it's not the top of our values, like it's a must-have, it's a tolerable. But I worked in an office once, open plan office, whoever come up with that idea, I think there must have been about 100 social workers, and then there was about 50 family workers. And most of us were on the phone most of the time, or typing.
Loud.
And it was also fashionable for everybody to have their nails done. So not only were they typing, they were typing with acrylic nails. Yeah. And the noise level in there was just intolerable for me a lot of the time. I couldn't concentrate. I was distracted all the time. I knew it was affecting my performance. And now it's the total opposite, because I work from home most of the time. And I look back and I was like, how did I ever survive that environment? And that's the thing, at the time I didn't realize how much the environment was having an impact on my whole system. And I might, it would take us, when you come from an environment that is so stressful to your system, a lot of people say it takes them a week to relax into the holiday before they have a holiday. And it's like the second or third week when they relax, because there's such a sort of disjoint. And it's only when you give yourself some space on something that you realize, wow,
That wasn't working for me.
That wasn't even working.
That wasn't the thing I thought I wanted.
Exactly.
Oh,
so
yes.
I was just, the final bit is, if you're reflecting and you're not, hopefully not everyone is having a tower moment, which we've talked in another episode, that is a crescendo, it's intense, where things have just built up to this degree where the whole foundation of everything can just feel like it's crashing down on you. But there are signs that if we don't pay attention to them, we can end up where that happens, because we can't tolerate it after a period of time, whether that's a relationship or a job. So if we're sitting back and reflecting in those moments of, is it a subtle moment where there's something that just is about this situation, and what do I do about it? So I think, I feel, I notice it, I learn something about that, I learn something about myself. Is it me? Is it the environment? Is it an interchange between the both? And if I really want to make some changes towards something that I really am going to love, or I create a family life that I'm really going to love, what are the values and how do I now emit them? How do I create that? So if you want peace, you have to feel peace. If you want focus and clarity, so it's working towards, and I think it's about the intention that you set. You don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know what the end result's going to be. You don't even know if there's going to be magical moments, because we can't chase the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. We've got to just take the step on the journey. And it's setting that intention. And I think that was a really key point that you shared, that doesn't exist necessarily in a lot of the other models where they talk about these changes. And we don't for one moment underestimate how significant sometimes these steps can feel. But the fear is far greater than reality. And I have had evidence of that. I have wonderful evidence of that with this project that we've set up, where one person alone, we taught them about the thinking cycle. They have changed their life massively within 3 or 4 weeks.
I love to see it doesn't take much time.
No,
it really doesn't.
I've been astounded.
It's amazing what a person can do when they put their intentions in the right arenas. And those right arenas typically are within self. They're not typically going to sit inside of an external force. It's always within self. Your way out is in, period. Everything that you want to accomplish in this world, everything that
is contained within you.
It's all within you. Every ounce of that wisdom to get you to that place is there. And you just have to find the courage to have faith in that wisdom. And when you do, your whole life will change, and it's going to be bumpy. It is a roller coaster. It is a spiral. It gets bumpy, but it is worth every ounce of it, because on the other side, there is a level of sacredness that you wouldn't have otherwise experienced. And to be able to be that proud of yourself and your accomplishment, no matter how big or small, it's profound in nature. And we are all so deserving of reaching these places and finding that elusive happiness, or that elusive peacefulness or joy, or whatever, insert the word.
We're searching.
Yeah. And so you're going to be able to find it once you start just stopping and looking within and taking that moment to dedicate to yourself and the changes that you want to see.
Yeah. And I think on the final note for me is, if it's tough to do, there are plenty of groups out there where people have got your back, who are reaching for you, helping you reach for what you want. You need to find the thing that is going to support you. Even if you're in the land of neutrality, the land of nothingness, the land of fear, the land of, I really don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm just setting this intention for something greater, better, bigger than anything I could have imagined. Have the faith and hope that that is a real possibility, because I have witnessed that time and time again.
Yeah.
I know it is a possibility.
It is so possible.
We've experienced it in our own lives, and I would like to do an
We've
episode.
witnessed it in others.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was the eye opener for you and I both throughout our life, is when you get to witness that in another person, be the observer of another person, making those changes and those breakthroughs, and knowing that this formula works, and it really works.
Yeah. And there are, that we've just touched upon pretty much sort of 5 models, really. They are all designed separately, are all designed to help us learn about ourselves and understand ourselves, and then understand ourselves in relation to other people. So whoever's listening to this, we wish you well on your journey.
Yes, you've got this.
Yeah, you've got this.
You got it.
And stay in the faith and hope, and bring light to all your situations, and know that visible and invisible forces have got your back.
On the highest, you said it. Yes, I love it.
I love it too, Danielle. Thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you so much. It was really good. Thank you.